I've got guys right now that are billionaires who have learned to surrender it all, and their billions came back only when they surrendered it to Jesus. And now they're like, they won't touch it until the Lord tells them what to do or how to navigate with large amounts of money for sustainable strategies. But these are men and women of God that have learned to surrender it all to Him. He's got to be the CEO. Money cannot be the issue. Although once money's not the issue, money becomes really effective. Can I put it that
Hi,
way?
my name is Evan Hermit, and I'm documenting my journey on becoming the best version of myself while learning how to be an entrepreneur and developing the successful habits that are necessary to get and keep me there. If you want to come alongside of me and make this journey together, we'll be listening and learning from some of the world's greatest mentors in the areas that matter most: faith, family, finances, friendship, fitness, and fun. So join me on the Whole Person Podcast. Jon Peterson, raised by missionary parents in Tokyo, Japan, has been dedicated to reaching cities most of his adult life. After graduating from Biola University in 1974, he began planting churches amongst hippie youth cultures during the 1970s. Jon and his wife Mindy and 3 children then moved into the red light district in Amsterdam in 1981, serving the youth with a missions heart for over 13 years. After extensive evangelism, church planting, a prayer ministry in Eastern and Western European cities, the Petersons were led to move back into the United States in 1994. Well, Jon, first of all, it's been a while, but welcome back.
Thank you, Evan. Appreciate it.
So the reason why, Jon, I wanted to bring you on is because you are, in today's terminologies, what we would consider a man of God, someone who is cut from the cloth of ministry. And I wanted to bring you on because what I'm realizing in my life and the lives of other people is that their relationship with God is just dry or hurt or broken. And obviously there's the evidence of the fall of man that has to do with that, sin nature. But I wanted to bring you on to help clarify maybe some questions that I have and that even the audience sent in to me on this. And I won't distinguish which questions are mine or the audience's, but would just love your insight on a relationship that we have with our Creator. So I guess to kick things off here, there are many times in my life where I've had vibrant seasons. I feel like while life was difficult during my upbringing in my peer-to-peer relationships, my walk with God was pretty vibrant, even though through college. And then the world smacks me in my face. And for whatever reason, my relationship with God just feels dry. And it's felt dry for many years. There's a lot of hardship, a lot of heartache, a lot of death, a lot of financial insecurities that I've gone through as an adult, all leading me back to just a hardening of my heart. So how do I go from having that dry season, that hardened heart, to having a vibrant relationship once more?
So, Evan, I love the question. It's what would you say? It's the human condition.
Right.
We're all on it, man. I would have said years ago that there is no way a person can actually be happy. A person could actually find equilibrium. I said that for years. My own journey is just unbelievable. I heard a little bit of your journey. My journey was similar. Born in a great family, went through hell. Absolute. Early on, I had demonic visitations in Japan. I was the only white kid in a 40,000 person fishing village on the coast of southern Japan, only 6 years after the World War II. So everything was being rebuilt. I had house of Shinto come and abduct me. I had a sailor abduct me. I was molested. I mean, it went on and on. I had stuff. This is all in my book Unveiled, but I've I've quickly learned there's no way out of hardship and no way out of dryness unless you meet the living God. All the self-help stuff I tried, all the self-cures, all of the trying to get, I mean, I went to every guru, pastor, inner healing thing I could think of. At 12, I got depressed. I went into a depression and my whole personality changed. I had it till I was 32 years old. So I was a depressed person. At the same time, I was very functional. I got married in those days. I went to Biola University in those days. But I couldn't find the peace of equilibrium. I couldn't break free of the feeling that a disaster is just around the corner. And so we'll get into it in a little bit, but the journey out of that or into a place of rest and peace supersedes the dryness. There's a truth and a faith and a walk with Jesus and with God, with his Father, that supersedes human circumstance. And I think that's the journey that we're on. Many will say, well, self-consciousness. The last thing I need is more consciousness of myself. I need a greater consciousness of the living God. And to that journey, all the hardship is meant to lead us to more of him. So that the journey is so critical. There's not a lot of quick fixes.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. As an individual who puts a priority on wanting to hear God's voice and knowing what he wants me to do in my life, I also find it difficult at times to hear God's voice because it feels like he's silent or far away.
Right.
Is God just being mean, or does he really want to talk to us? Because if he really wants to talk to us, I'm here saying, hey, let's talk. Where are you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, God is, there's nothing in God's character that is mean, but he certainly isn't human. He doesn't live by our rules. And there's a beautiful thing about God. His whole desire is to reveal himself, not always just talk to us or say, should I go on vacation or not? Should I buy that car? Should I get that house? Should I marry that person? He's way bigger than that. And when I first came into the Lord at 17, I could say I heard the Lord. It was pretty exciting stuff. I mean, it was like the first time in my life I heard my Father in heaven speaking to my heart. Son, I love you. I mean, that kind of, it was rich. 4 years into it, I came into an experience with the Holy Spirit that helped kind of boost all that. And I came into a theology of God speaks to his people, who my sheep hear my voice and all that. And then somewhere in my early 30s, late 20s, and I was middle of pastoring 800 hippies in Southern Oregon, it's like all of a sudden I couldn't hear a thing. I couldn't hear a thing. And I started thinking, have I done something wrong? Is God just kind of thumbing his nose at me? What is wrong here? And what I learned, it lasted for 10 years. I had a 10-year spell of dryness where I can't say that I really heard the Lord. But what I began to realize was God speaks in a lot of ways. Sometimes a specific clarity. He said, I will counsel you with my eye upon you. That's very intimate. He also is the God of silence. And I think what Father is trying to teach us is to believe him and trust his word for what it says in times when he's not speaking into our spirits. His word, and then he speaks to us through our friends, through our family. There's so many ways that God speaks, but I had a 10-year drought of hearing the voice of God. And what I learned was the beautiful little truth that Paul said, let the peace of God umpire your heart. Let it rule in your heart. It's the word umpire. You're out, safe, And I learned not to have to hear God's voice, but to know that God loved me because he said so. And everything in my brain fought against that. So I find a lot of dryness, a lot of confusion. There's people looking for an emotional, verbal response from God when he's already spoken and said, I love you with an everlasting love. And with the arms of love, I'm enfolding you. And are you going to believe it or not? And the dryness was a way of learning to live in the peace of God and not have to, I didn't have clarity on a lot of things. I just kind of moved forward. I raised kids, had my family, did missionary work. I planted churches. I got involved in business. I mean, and I couldn't hear detail, but I moved with the peace of God. I learned to discern the peace of God. It's our birthright as those that follow Jesus.
Hmm. Speaking of God's love,
Mm.
I don't know if this is because of my current, like my earthly father, and how other
Mm-hmm.
people respond to God is based off of their relationship with their current father or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to be very careful because not only do I live 2 doors down from my dad, but I don't want to dishonor my father either.
Absolutely.
He's a very critical individual,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the best intentions.
Yeah.
And growing up, I didn't realize this, but as an adult, I do. Nothing is ever right, or
Mm-hmm.
I can never do anything good enough,
Mm-hmm.
not because of me, but because he wants control of the situation.
Right.
And so, unless if it's him actually doing it, it's just not good enough, even if he asked for my help. And I feel like that some way has leaked into my own relationship with God because I feel like at times God just disapproves of me, that I can't do anything right. Which, I mean,
Yeah.
there's truth to that. I do because it's in nature.
Right.
But there's just this feeling of being cursed. Well, actually, I'm going to separate that. I'll talk about the cursing aspect, but just that I can't do anything right, and that he's disappointed.
Yeah. Boy, there are two kind of poles that the Bible talks about. One is servants and slaves, and one is orphans. And we get our slave nature or that drivenness, gotta succeed, gotta achieve, gotta keep going, can't give up, work, work, work. Then the other one is the orphan, which needs to feel like it belongs and never belongs. Never feels like it's connected. I had a message in my spirit as a little boy. If I'm alone, I will always be alone. If anyone left the room, if I left the room, no one would miss me. If I fell off a cliff, no one would know that I was gone. So the orphan slave continuum or paradigm really where we get a lot of that is from our human parentage. We get it because we're born flawed, but at the same time, it's reinforced in families where work is everything, or a little orphan girl, a little orphan boy can't receive the love because they've been told they have to earn it. They're not loved just by the fact that they exist. They have to earn that love in some way. And so fathers shape the identity of the child. Fathers are huge in the identity shaping. And my own father was a beautiful man. He loved the Lord. It was awesome. He's now with Jesus. He's gone. He died at 94 years old. But my dad absolutely could not believe that God loved him unconditionally. Even the father said, I love you, you're my son. He couldn't receive it. He had to be a missionary to do good things so that God would be pleased with him. He was always saying to me, I just want to be useful. I said, but Dad, what happens in the times when you're not useful? Are you still valuable? He said, I don't think so. I have to be working. And I said, you know what? Not me. That's a curse in our family. I'm not accepting that. I'm valuable whether I do something or not. He loves me unconditionally. I'm a son. I'm not a slave, and I'm not an orphan. And that this has taken a kind of a lifelong journey to really come into the security that know that my parents were beautiful. They gave me a lot, but they're not my ultimate identity givers and shapers. I have a Father in heaven who's taken over the role. And I get to believe what he says, or I get to believe all the mixed messages I got from my earthly parents.
That's really great advice because specifically talking about work, I come from a German background.
Woo! There you go.
And one thing about Germans that you should know, especially the older Germans, not maybe so much the younger Americanized,
Right,
but
the old guys. Yep.
the old guys,
Yep.
there's two things they're really, really great at: drinking and hard work. And, you know, hard work, hard labor is like a badge in our culture. It's,
Yeah.
the more crap I can put up with, the better of a man I am, which is completely cultural to how
Wow.
God made me.
Right.
And I'm like, how little can I do and this still turn out really good? And so what you're saying makes so much sense. And I'm really going to have to chew on that because there's a lot of freedom in what you're saying, specifically for me, because work was so valued in our community, in our culture, in our relationships that identity formed from it. And
Right.
man, feel free to ask me a question.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I lived across the border from the Germans into the Dutch, and the Dutch have a very similar heavy work ethic. I'd say a good part of Northern Europe, up into Scandinavia, the work ethic is so strong. What we dealt with most with folks in that part of the world was the same thing. They could not believe that God loved them unconditionally. My friend Floyd McClung was a very well-known missionary with Youth in the Mission, a leader in the movement. He was one of my best friends. He was my mentor. Um, he wrote a book in Holland called Father Heart of God. It's since gone into 30 or 40 languages. It's this little book called The Father Heart of God. It was fascinating because the Dutch had never heard of God. They came out of Calvinism. They came out of the Reform. Had been in the Reformation and were very strict. And God was expecting us to be a certain way and work hard and be righteous and put away all sin and iniquity. It was rough stuff. And here comes a book on the Father Heart of God. And we discovered that they did not have a word for mercy. There was no word in the language for mercy. It was, I won't go into the language side of it, but it was more like grace, but the idea that God loves me unconditionally. He has pardoned me from all my stuff. He has made me righteous in his son, and he's opening his heart, just like the prodigal son. The father said, "You've always been with me. Everything I've ever had is yours. Why are you working so hard? And why wouldn't I accept my other son who's been eaten with the pigs?" That's who I am. That's the Father Heart of God. Well, that book exploded in the country because it hit a dry spot. You talk about people being dry. If you've got a vicious view of God, then you're going to be dry. As the Lord starts teaching us how to accept his love and his mercy, that he is a merciful God, um, that all begins to alter. And I must say, Evan, it's a lifetime journey, and we need friends, need mentors, uh, who walk it through. If we get isolated, we're going to get picked off.
That leads me to I really liked how you said you will be dry if you have a vicious view of God. I grew up as an evangelical, word of faith, and as an adult, I started seeing some problematic things with that in terms of faith, healing, or money. And I'm becoming a little bit more vocal about this right now than I was. But I would say in September, actually, I feel like before September, I felt like God had been asking me not to tithe, which is really weird because everything I've ever been taught is contradictory to that. And I always tithed.
Right.
And the two reasons why I tithe. I never tithe because I bought into the theory that God's going to give me 100-fold return, because that's just a business transaction. But for whatever reason, I did buy into Malachi 3:10, where he does talk about bring all your tithes to the storehouse so that there may be room, and God will bless you abundantly, and so that he may rebuke the devourer, which implies that if you don't tithe, he won't rebuke the devourer, therefore you will be cursed.
Right.
I bought into that. And so part of why I do want to be generous, I was afraid of being cursed by God. And then I explained to you over the phone the year that I had last year, and I just said, well, if this isn't being cursed, I don't know what is. And then I just felt God's leading to stop giving. Not indefinitely. I'm going to say that because I do believe in giving and generosity and love.
Mm-hmm.
But God's wanting to do something in my own heart.
Mm-hmm.
I had a vicious view of God, what blessings look like and where blessings came from. It didn't come from my checkbook. It didn't come from me giving. And cursings didn't come from me not giving. And he is bringing freedom in that area. And he's still working on me in that area. So I guess my question is this, that's something that God's teaching me right now, but I still feel unworthy or unable to be blessed by God. And I want to know what it means and feels like to be blessed by God. And theoretically, Jesus died, and that's all the blessing I'll ever need because I have eternal salvation. And if that's enough, then yes, that is enough, and I will take that.
Mm-hmm.
But what does more blessing look like here on earth? Or is that just part of a false doctrine that I've believed?
Yeah, boy, that's a big topic, and it's part of a lifelong journey. I know I grew up with a poverty mentality. It was unrighteous, ungodly to have money. All you need is what you have to live on. That's all you need. So my parents got paid once a quarter. They would come in 6 weeks after their paycheck came in from the United States. Took 3 weeks to get the mail to get their paycheck that they got once a quarter. And they would come into my room as a little boy and they would say, "Isn't it great? We just ran out of money. We're going to have to trust God." Well, I thought, who does this? That's kind of cool. They're trusting God. I love it. As I grew up, I realized they actually were suspicious of any blessing, any wealth. Be careful. You'll get proud if you get too much money. You've got to tithe or God won't bless you. You've got to give, and not only tithe, but offerings. If you don't do offerings on top of tithes. So the whole legalistic paradigm is slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Something I have to do to gain the approval or love of God. It's slavery. So what often God does is he takes away that religious injunction from us and says, you know what? I'm bigger than my own injunctions. I'm bigger than you have to tithe. I'm bigger. So I have had probably 20 years where I haven't tithed once. I still haven't. But I give more money now than I ever have when I was tithing. But what changed in the meanwhile was I'm a son. I've abounded. Paul said I've abounded and I've lacked like crazy. I've been all over the place. I've had no knowledge of where my income's coming from. I realize now that it's not my actual job that gets finances from me, although I need to work and I do work. Injunction in Scripture, you need to work. But it's faith in his ability to be my provider. It is God that gives the ability to gain wealth. I'll have it when I need it. I trust him. Right now I'm working with business leaders all over the world. There is so much money flying around my head right now, and I'm not allowed to go to anyone and ask them for any kind of help personally. He's my provider. And now what's happening is people are coming to help us pull off some of our city transformation stuff. Huge amounts of money. It's not something that I've ever had to do, but by being faithful to be a son, to give when he tells me to give, where he tells me to give, there's a liberty and a joy, again, of the blessing of the Lord. And I've learned not to have it. I've had seasons where I had no clue where the next meal was coming from for years.
So
Now,
sorry, go ahead.
now it's opposite. So this is a new season. Well, he has every right to move me back to the old season. I've come to where it doesn't matter whether I have it or don't have it. He's my Father. He loves me, and He will always take care of me and my family and always provide for what He tells me to do. If He tells me to go to London to do something, He'll provide for that. It's not my worry.
So I want to dig into a little bit more about what you're talking about, specifically in business and money flying all over the place and not being allowed to ask for any of it. I have an entrepreneur bent, and most people listening do as well. There's this idea within entrepreneurship community that we are chasing wealth, essentially, where we want to have more than enough money. Obviously, want to add value and contribute, but in the terms of financial dollars, is that we are chasing blessing. We're chasing, I don't want to say specific riches, because blessing and riches are, you can measure those in different ways, but specifically money
Right.
and wealth, that is indicative of how well you do, how valuable you are, and what you can contribute. And so as an entrepreneur, if I look at, okay, well, there's not a lot of dough in the bank, so then I'm not bringing value, I'm not doing all these things, which makes me feel less as a person as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you said blessings come from God. How do I measure my responsibility and my work ethic and everything in business versus it's God who's going to bless? God's going to be providing. I mean, how do I balance that? Because that's where I struggle with as an entrepreneur, because
Right.
especially in real estate, because I mean, there were months where I had deals closing left and right. And then there was a time where it didn't matter. I had 11 deals bust in a row. Nothing had to do with me. It had to do with a buyer or a seller or a circumstance that I could not control.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know. I look at the top 1% of agents and be like, wow, you're killing it. I'm in the top 10% of agents, which is still really good, but I want to be in the top 1%. So where's God in this versus my effort?
Right. Got it. So there is a horrible thing that we've had in the family of God for many years. It's called the sacred secular split, right? So you got life is what I do. I'm a minister and I'm in the ministry. And what I do is sacred. Dear God, what you do, my friend, is very secular. You're in the secular world doing secular things. Well, pastors, leaders of churches have bought that nonsense. And what's happened is they lay out the meal on a Sunday. They give it to their folks who they expect to go 6 days a week out into the world as the world and somehow live for God, but their work is not seen as sacred or holy. What's sacred is what I do, preaching sermons and all that kind of stuff. What you do is making money, and we all know that money is, the root of all evil.
Right.
That paradigm has killed us. Rather than sacred secular, actually, it's the rule of God in all of life. So we've got business guys who talk about going to church, but they don't see themselves as the church in the marketplace. We have we have church leaders who see themselves as the sacred guys to equip the other guys. But there's not much equipping going on. Right now in the world, business leaders, entrepreneurs are starting social justice things. They're starting ministries. They're starting stuff that are not connected to the local church because that break was there, the sacred secular break. But when God created man, he created us to work. Work was not the result of the fall. Work was we're to tend the garden of God. The earth is the Lord's. When God sat down on his throne in the third chapter of Genesis, and he rested on the seventh day, he was the deity putting his creation into function. And that function was because the earth was the Lord's and everything in it. And that earth was temple earth. It was the temple. He wanted his people, his creation, Adam and Eve and us, to work his garden and work his temple as an act of worship. You talk to most Christian business leaders have not yet made Jesus the CEO of their companies. They have not invited the Holy Spirit into the journey of actually surrendering that work to them. They've made money the goal rather than hearing God, rather than discipling people within the context of the business environment. I've got guys right now that are billionaires who have learned to surrender it all, and their billions came back only when they surrendered it to Jesus. And now they're like, they won't touch it until the Lord tells them what to do or how to navigate. They're now going to be totally engaged in city transformation with large amounts of money for sustainable strategies. But these are men and women of God that have learned to surrender it all to Him. He's got to be the CEO. Money cannot be the issue, although once money is not the issue, money becomes really effective. Can I put it that way?
Right.
Once money is not an issue, money becomes an amazing tool for blessing, for creating wealth, for distributing and sustaining things that jobs and all manner of things that I think God's calling the body of Christ to get into, that heretofore the government has tried to do. I think we're going to step into more and more of that stuff.
That kind of goes into part of the answer I think that could be for the next, I guess, question. So I've had a lot of disappointment or delusion in my life because I want it to be more meaningful, more impactful to the world around me. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of people know that since 7 years of age, I wanted to be a pastor.
Right.
Went to school, spent $130,000 in this pursuit of being a pastor for education and training.
Ouch.
Here's the great thing. I don't have very much left to pay back. So thank God.
Yay.
Like very, very little. So
Yeah.
it's close. But in that pursuit, even after, not that I need to spend all that, but that's what God asked me to do, is to go to a specific university, and I did. And there's a lot of things that happened through that in a good way. But then I didn't become a pastor. I had like 6 or 7 churches that I had tried to help, work for, submit to, and got ran off based off of lies or false promises. And I got to a point where I was just done pursuing to be a pastor. And I know there's ministry in the business world. I know I can minister. I know that some people say, I'm a pastor doing this, but
Right.
I was thinking vocational ministry, not
Right.
business ministry.
Right.
And a lot of my self-worth was hurt because I thought I'd have a greater impact doing something else. I am much more content today than I've been in the past, forever in my life, which is, God's work. But there's still that inner voice saying your life doesn't have much impact on the world around you. Your life doesn't contribute in a way that's meaningful, which is the false narrative. But for those of us that have or still do believe those false voices, how do we receive healing in that area?
I'm part of a network of churches, and I'd say 70% of our folks in our churches, this is in Europe and the UK and here in the States and Canada, I would say 70% maybe of our folks are millennials. And so the millennials generation, your generation, is a gift from God. And one of the things, the entrepreneurship of the millennials, the love of community, sharp. I've dedicated my life to making sure that the millennial generation understands the ways of God and takes over for us old farts when we move on in a way that will expand the kingdom of God on the earth. And one of the Achilles heels, one of the things built in to this particular generation is the orphan thing, the orphan spirit. So what you've got is the desire to make a difference, the desire to make an impact, to have a relevant life, and then at the same time feeling totally inadequate to do it. So there's this huge gulf, this disparity between the dream and the heart and the reality of what people go through. Then they get hit with all the crap of life, and they're trying to figure out how do I bridge this huge gulf between what I dream about and what I'm actually experiencing. And what I love to say, I don't know, I won't have time to go into this, but there's 6 phases of the development of a leader of a course of a lifetime. So during our lives, there's kind of 6 phases. And the 20s and the 30s are the time when we develop our careers and our ministries, during that 20, 30-year period. The 20s are the years of idealism. When you start hitting the 30s, you begin to come into realism, which isn't always pretty. Idealism is like, it's got to be better than this. I ask my young guys all the time, I said, do you have a joy of the future? Do you have hope for the future? I'd say no more than 10 or 20%. When we first start with them, they first come in, do you have an excitement about the future? Do you believe, And it's like, you know. One of the things that God does during the 20s and 30s is we think he's preparing us for more business, more ministry, more success, more, we're just getting better all the time. It's very evolutionary. We're evolving into a higher form. So I have that in ministry. I'll start little, and then I get big, and then someday I'll be a pastor of a church, and then we'll be a mega church, and then we'll have a network of churches around the world, and we'll be really, really cool. And then those dreams just got shot down so fast. It was unbelievable. I got kicked out of 4 ministries in 3 years. Well, it's a badge of honor now. I realized that God was using it to shape me. So is God preparing me for more ministry, or is God using ministry and work to prepare me for more of himself? And am I being prepared for more ministry, or is all this journey into all these things that we do a journey into understanding more of him? Is it him we want, or is it success and relevance that we want? That's the question for humankind, actually. Do you want the living God, or do you want a utopian success?
That kind of answers the question that I had, which was, what does God want from me?
Mm-hmm.
Because what I want from myself is that success, is that meaning and the purpose.
Right.
There's this idea of God's general will and God's specific will, and that God's general will is a greater calling than the specific will.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in this me-centered culture that I love so much is too far interested in God's specific will versus his general will, meaning that specific.
Well, that's well put. Yeah, that's well put. Yeah, some would call it narcissism, that we are, it wasn't just your generation, man. The boomers, oh my gosh, talk about a pile of narcissists. We hated our parents, what they gave us. So we rebelled. We started the hippie thing. Out of it came the Jesus movement that I was part of. But we've been self-centered forever. And the beauty of God's kingdom is that you never lose by giving away what you have. It's an upside down kingdom. He who seeks to find his life is going to lose it. Come on. What on earth is that about? Pick up your cross and follow me. I'll tell you, Evan, I don't know. There's not a guy in my circle right now. Guys, when I say guy, I mean couples. We work as couples, husbands and wives. There's not a couple amongst us that God's using at a high level right now that haven't lost everything. And it was a catharsis. It was that place of, will I come to the cross? Will I lay down the idea that I need to be significant? Am I willing to go into a season of obscurity? We have a joke around here with all my friends. We call it the cave. You in the cave still? There's those cave years, and they come and go. I had a really big cave time in my 30s. I had a massive cave time in my late 40s, and I came out of it somewhere around 55 years old. And I can say to you, it's one of the most precious times I've ever been in, to take the dreams that I have, surrender them to the Lord, knowing that he actually gives it back better than you ever dreamed it could be.
Hmm.
That's where faith and trust come in.
All right. So I want to go down this road because
All right.
David spent many years in the cave before he became king.
Yeah, he
And
did.
and it's so funny that you bring that up because I was just like, God, I feel like David. I feel like you anointed me at a younger age, and I had this idea of what you wanted me to do. And, between my 20s, I lost over like 13, 14 people that were close to me, one per year. I lost a child. This past year we had 7 financial and emotional hits. Like, I feel like I hit my cave emotional toll. Like, I am the speed and punching bag of life. And
Right.
granted,
Right.
there's always people that have it worse. I'm not trying to go, woe is me. I say all that to say I feel like I'm starting to peek my head out of that cave,
Mm-hmm.
because about 2 years ago I met with my pastor, who became I switched churches specifically because the current pastor kind of wooed me to the church
Mm-hmm.
to volunteer and like to come on staff as a volunteer, which I
Mm-hmm.
could do partially because I worked for myself. And then he retired after I
Oh,
came,
wow.
and it broke my heart. But God told me before that happened that there was a new pastor coming, and it was going to be the associate pastor. Literally 4 days before it happened, God said, this will happen. And 4 days later, it did. So I knew I was in the right place. And I went to the new pastor, and I basically was like, look, I'm done trying to pursue ministry. If I ever get involved in vocational ministry, I put it on your feet at your table. You're going to take this up. I'm done. I'm done. I don't want to jump from church to church to church to try to chase a dream. Meanwhile, my kids are replanting, because it is now
Yeah.
more important for me that my kids are consistently in the same church in healthy environment than it is for me to pursue a job. That
Wow.
became my desire. And then since that, while life has still been hard, the podcast started happening.
Mm.
A TV show happened. All these other things that I had wanted in my life literally came out of nowhere and happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like I had to go make it happen. They were opportunities that I stepped into.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if this cave season is about over. If you get some prophetic thing, go for it. But what's next after the cave?
Um, so the dry seasons, we talked about the caves, if you will, um, always happens in God's time, and there's an increased degree of surrender that you feel in your spirit, because what he's after is getting more of him. At the end of the cave, do you know more about God than you did when you entered the cave? Do you know his ways better? Are you in love with his ways, with his word? Um, Caves can come back around. I've been in 3 or 4 different cave seasons in my life. I look back down, I'm very grateful for them. At the time, they're hell, because your idealism or your dream is not this. Being in a cave is not the dream. I remember when I was in my 20s, I've heard of a cave in the Saragossa desert of Spain. And there was this Catholic dude that went and spent 30 years living in this cave. And he came out of the cave and started preaching on the love of God. That's all he meditated on for 30 years in the cave, was the love of God. And I thought, dear God, what on earth? You're going to go to a cave and all you can talk about is the love of God when you come out? Now, this is when I was living as an orphan, that I was wanting to do the ministry dream. I'm going to be successful. I listened to that dude and it broke my heart. I realized I didn't know the love of God. He had sat in a cave in a season where he got to know the ways of God, heard the heart of God. And when he came out, he wasn't pushing his own agenda anymore. He was simply just given the word of the Father. And it healed hearts. I came into and my friends came into some amazing healing through this beautiful man that sat in a cave for 30 years. Now, I don't recommend that. And I know the Lord doesn't put us in the real cave most of the time. It's a metaphorical cave, but it's still to know more about him, if we surrender to his ways, it's to not be so driven to be significant, successful, and surrender all those dreams to the Lord. God's dream for you, I guarantee it, and for all of us listening, is bigger than the one we have ourselves. Much bigger.
A lot of people wonder, because of these dry seasons, if they're really going to heaven or not, if God really loves them or not. There's a lot of teachings about grace, works, and then this idea of a lukewarm Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something at times I struggle with, because I do believe in God's grace. I don't know if I believe in once saved, always saved or not.
Uh-huh.
I think you can turn your back on God and disavow and stop believing.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the person that believes God, believes in Jesus, but maybe hasn't made him directly Lord of their life, in the context that they habitually fall into the same sin, or they're considered a lukewarm Christian? You know, a lot of Christians like to say that because, you know, it says you're a God puke and I'll spew you out of my mouth.
Wow.
You know, I don't know what the definition or what a lukewarm Christian looks like, but then my question is, do I fall in that category? Because, you know, I fall into patterns of the same sin, or there are seasons where I just don't read my Bible and I'm lukewarm. You know, where's your grace versus, do I have to work harder to maintain a relationship in order to go to heaven? Like, there's just this confusion around it.
Yeah.
So maybe you can help clarify some of that confusion.
Sure. Don't want to super grace it. Don't want to be legalistic. I can't keep all the rules anyway. I've tried and it doesn't work, right?
Right.
It just wear out and fall on the sidewalk. Or what the heck? I'll just go do X, Y, Z. I get grace is there and I get forgiven. I find that argument to be really unhelpful.
Right.
Because you go back, it's like juggling something. You got the red ball and the green ball, and they're both going in the air, and you just get exhausted trying to keep all that works and grace thing straight. Here's what I know. I know that I'm loved, that I'm a son, that he loved me with an everlasting love, that the Spirit of God has been given me to cry out, Abba, Father. I know that Father makes us sons, Jesus makes us servants, and the Spirit makes us ambassadors. I know that. I know what I know. What I don't know is the journey into that. What I know is that he loves me and that hell has committed to cause me to not believe that. That everything in life mitigates against the idea that God is good, that he loves, and he has a plan and a destiny for us. Well, we call it heaven, but forget heaven for a second. Just talk about God's desire to make us like his son, who suffered, who died, who rose, and who is in charge of his universe. Well, we won't get into politics, but Christians today are confused about God's involvement in politics or not, in dual citizenship, confusion. So I wrote on it because it's such an issue right now. But the question isn't, am I going to heaven or not? The question is, are you coming into your sonship? Are you thwarting the lies that come into your head that says Evan is not enough? Evan's got to work for this. Evan's got a dream, but it may not happen because Evan's a screw up. All the stuff that we get into our heads. And this is where fellowship comes in. I believe that we're meant to be together as friends to help each other through this journey of coming to the cross, of coming into sonship. I use that term, coming into sonship, very intentionally. There's an aha season in the life of a leader when they realize they are no longer slaves, they are no longer orphans, and they are sons. And you wake up in the morning and you slap your feet down on the ground and you go, no matter what happens, good or bad, seen or unseen, whether I'm a star or I'm in obscurity, it doesn't matter because I'm a son and I'm loved. and you live off of that. And then comes the blessing, then comes the clarity, then comes the direction.
Mhm.
So a lot of this stuff is to funnel us into becoming a son like his son, and to rest in his love and trust him.
Hmm.
We are
Well,
pilgrims.
yeah. We'll have a
We
sidebar
are pilgrims.
conversation because I'll
Okay.
share a story that, that we don't have time for on this episode.
Nice.
So, growing up in the Word of Faith community,
Mm-hmm.
there's multiple ideas around healing,
Yeah.
and it has hurt a lot of people, and it has even disillusioned me. Um, but not just within the Word of Faith, but I think many other people look at this and ask God, I don't get this, or
Right.
tell him someone has cancer or a kidney issue on their deathbed or dying. And we know that God does miracles. We know that God heals. We've seen it, or we've heard about it, we've read about it, but it just doesn't happen to us, or it doesn't happen to me, or the person that you're praying for. And we'll all lay hands on this person and we'll pray for healing, but they die anyway.
Mm-hmm.
How do we reconcile that with a God that we're supposed to believe that wants to do miracles and heal people when the majority of what we see is death?
Yeah. So I've been involved in a lot of that. Charismatic movement and the Word of Faith movement kind of paralleled each other for years. Um, I saw a lot of miracles. I've prayed for people who were healed of cancer, of stuff, back problems, migraines. So you have your degree of success. If it
Right.
works, you're successful. If it doesn't, you're kind of an idiot, or certainly you don't have enough faith, or something's wrong with you. Because
Right.
we prayed for the little kid, and the little kid died. Oh my gosh! I mean, that whole world of the expectation of a miracle has created more anxiety in the church than most things. There's been people removed because of their lack of faith. There's been people condemned because they didn't believe enough, all in the name of defining faith as a rigid thing that you hold on to and demand others to agree with you on. And if they don't, they're somehow substandard. That is so far from the character of God. Do I believe that we can be healed? I do. I would love to see a lot more healing. But at the same token, I'm more committed to trusting God than understanding God. I don't understand a ton of stuff. I don't know why my nephew was born with so many issues that he died at 37 years old after I think it was four transplants that he had to have for liver and kidneys and all this stuff. Diabetic, and he just died on his floor. I was the first, his dad were the first guys in his, and there's my nephew Josh, dead on a gurney, and I'm saying to the Lord, so what was the purpose of all this? 37 years. And he would come to me. We would smoke cigars together, right? That was kind of our thing. We would have nice little cigars together. And he would say, I'm damaged goods. I'm damaged goods. What's the purpose of this? People prayed for me. He was part of a Foursquare church. They'd pray, nothing happened. So the Foursquare guys removed themselves. They kind of distanced themselves because Josh and his family weren't kind of believing for it. Now, the current church they were in were really loving. They were beautiful. They loved him to the end. It was really neat. But I don't any longer expect God to do anything other than love us, be kind, and I don't need answers anymore. Paul said, hey, look, you're the clay. Are you going to say to the potter, why have you made me like this? Why are you doing it this way? There is a sovereignty of God that a narcissistic culture doesn't like.
Mm.
We just don't like that he doesn't answer our questions. We don't like that he doesn't answer things or do them the way we want. Meanwhile, we're killing each other. We're beating each other up for lack of faith, or we're holding accountable for all the prayers that we prayed, and the results weren't there. You know, Job just said, though he slay me, yet will I praise. It's pretty uncommon these days. Though he slay me, yet will I praise him. We're not talking about a wimpy God here. We're not talking about Christians. We're talking about disciples who've surrendered the need to understand everything. Meanwhile, I'm pushing in. I want to see more miracles.
Right.
You know?
I agree with what you're saying. It's kind of like I'm always going to believe for the miracle.
Yep.
And be okay with no answer.
Yep.
That was a question by an audience member who's going through some stuff right now.
Yeah.
Let me know what you think on this, because I feel like I've developed my own view, and please feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong or off somewhere, because I have seen so much death.
Yeah.
As an individual, I've lost so many close people. And when I look through it all, one, I realize that I'm not God, and I don't understand why he does or does not do healing. And I take that as a humbling block to know that I'm not God. And I also know that if I'm believing for healing in someone's life, I must also believe that if they die, I must also have faith with God or on God for not knowing the reason, and that it's okay. I can't just have faith one way. I have to have faith both ways and trust God.
Very good. Yeah.
And then the other thing is, well, then why did you allow this to happen? What was the purpose of this person's life? Is so that they would get to experience here on earth the love of the Father. And like that's the purpose of creating us.
Right.
Is that when I lost our daughter, I was sitting in the hospital room that night, and I asked God, why did you create her knowing that this would happen? Because she was a premature stillborn. Why did you know this? And he said to me, because her eternal plan and her eternal purpose far outweighs any hurt or pain that she might ever go through. And I'm thinking, as a father, wow, she must have an incredible job up in heaven. What is it? You know, like, what's this amazing job? And he goes, for her to dwell with me and me to dwell with her. It was super simple. And I realized that I don't fully understand, you know, we lost her early, but in terms of your nephew, why people go through years of pain and suffering. But what God told me is the pain, the desperation, the anxiety, life itself feeling sucked right out of me when I had to hand her body over to the nurse, never to see her, never to hold her again. And when I asked God to show me his love and all that later that night, that's the picture that he sent back in my memory. And I said, God, where is it? He brought that back of me handing my daughter over. And he said, that is how I feel anytime a child of mine lives a life without ever knowing my love. And so to me, it was at that point, salvation became much more real in the context that either I believe this or I don't. That there is eternal life, and that I must have enough faith and trust in God, not understanding it, that there is life after death.
Yeah.
And I don't have to trust my understanding of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know why some people have more pain and suffering on this world than others. But in some manner, in some way, in God's sovereignty, it has to help draw that person closer. And I mean, I understand we live in a fallen world, and there's things that happen because of just the destruction of sin. And I'm not saying God causes people to be injured or to be that way. I don't.
No.
But God allows things to happen because he understands the greater picture.
Yeah.
And while I don't understand any of this, going back to what you're saying, I can just trust God and know that he loves me.
Yeah. I couldn't have said that better, Evan. That was beautifully done with the emotion in your heart and that little interchange you had over the Lord, over the death of your daughter. Absolutely speaks to me. It was so beautiful. My own journey on all the death and dying and the disappointment stuff it does give me a new perspective on salvation. It really has. And I wrote Unveiled because I wanted people to realize that everything we go through has to do with redemption. God buys back, he redeems. There's an eternal purpose that we're really limited to see. And I actually believe that a lot of pain and suffering is to help us become more eternal in our thinking. It's to separate us from this myopic view of the world of I live for 70, 80 years and then I go, hopefully I go to heaven. Horrible way of looking at life. But that we've begun a journey, we've come into his kingdom and we're going to keep going. And our loved ones that die before their time, they're continuing on with the calling of God. This world doesn't define everything. It isn't the begin all, the end all. I don't ask the question anymore why. I hardly ask why anymore. I'm kind of done with it. That's just me. Because two things. One, if I don't need to know, he's not going to tell me. If I do need to know, he will tell me. And so I said, wow, that was weird. I really don't know what happened there, but I'm going to trust you. I try to start with trust now. This is after a lot of years of the Lord redeeming every imaginable kind of nonsense in my life. I have no excuse. I can't look back and say God was unfaithful. I can't look back and say God didn't provide. I can't look back and say, with all the firings that I went through, that God hasn't made me a blessing. I'm so glad he didn't answer my prayers for my puny dreams, because his dream that I'm now living is a whole lot bigger and better. There's an eternal sense of this. This is the beginning of an eternal journey to be with him. We're not going to sit up there and play harps, man. We're going to expand kingdoms. And we're laying the foundation in this lifetime for that beautiful eternity that we're called to together.
I like to end each show with the same 3 questions if time allows.
Sure.
What has been, let me phrase this. In terms of self-talk, hold on. I'll have to edit that out. There we go. Now my papers are falling.
Go there.
Thank God for editing. All right.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
What's the biggest lie in self-talk you had or currently struggle with?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier the seminal lie that was in my heart as a kid, and I was more on the orphan side than the slave side. I wasn't as German. I was a little bit more, although my mom's half German, it was really more of a Danish. My grandparents were very loving. My dad was very loving. Everyone was very loving, I mean, they were sweet as can be. They were beautiful people. And not real demanding, just sweet. But I got this idea when I started having nightmares at 3 years old of dragons chasing me into hell. It happened after a Shinto priest came and cleansed our home. And from that point on, I was visited by these demonic things at night. Wake up screaming. My dad would hold me, wouldn't know what to do. At 8 years old, I literally had somebody materialize in front of me. I was standing with a friend on a glass hill. It was refuse glass. And we loved to pick the little pieces of glass and color it and look at them. We were just 8 years old. And we looked up, and there's a man standing in front of us, and he held he didn't say a word at first. He just held a picture of a man and woman copulating. And he said, "This is the essence of life." And we looked at other, and when we looked back, he wasn't there. He was gone. I mean, put your own explanation to it. But there were these inputs into my life that pretty much said, then I was told that at 8 years old, I had a surgery. I was told I would never have children. I couldn't have kids. Who would tell an 8-year-old that they can't have kids? You know, I mean, who goes around doing that kind of stuff? The doctor is speaking to my dad in front of me and said, "We're not sure that he'll ever have children." Well, I'm happy to report I have 3 kids and 9 grandkids. God's been good. But there was just this history that said, I'm not safe. I'm alone. I'll always be alone. If I leave the scene, nobody will miss me. That's an orphan all the way. And I don't struggle with that anymore. Those days are completely over. And in retrospect, my journey was Father's love to convince me that the prophetic voices in my head that were lying to me, the false prophets, were confirming this. Emotionally, you could feel it emotionally, like it was real. Now I realized I'm being duped. I've been fooled by these idiots. This is not who I'm meant to be. And I started getting a little feisty and started fighting back. It was a long journey, but I can say to you today that doesn't plague me anymore. That doesn't define me. I am a son. I'm loved. I'm dangerous, and I can love dangerously.
What brings you peace?
I have a number of things that bring me peace. That brings me peace. That I can wake up in the morning and slap my feet down on the floor and say, no matter what I did or didn't do, no matter what I'm going to do or don't do today, I'm loved. He will guide me. He's with me. His eye is upon me to counsel me. Nothing will separate me from the love of God. I'll tell you what, the love of God is the source of any peace I've ever experienced. Then other things bring me peace. Good friendships, good relationship, you know, a good marriage with a faithful friend. My wife's my friend. We've been married almost 48 years. We worked hard for our marriage. We almost killed each other. You know, we've almost divorced 2 different times. We were just sick and tired of hurting each other. But the peace of the Lord comes when his redemption comes into a thing, when he moves in, and whether it's for your finances or your now we got the burden of our grandkids. You know, now we're walking them through their teen years. And so we get peace when we hear God, when we hear his heart. We see people redemptively. We see cities redemptively. It brings peace. Get God's perspective on everything.
What's the best decision you've ever made?
Well, believing in Jesus, receiving the Holy Spirit, and marrying my wife. Those are the 3 top ones.
Jon, thank you so much for your time, your life experiences, and just everything that you've helped unveil today. Literally. Hey, the title of your book.
There you go.
And just being a conduit for us to ask really difficult questions and gain understanding. You know, because I asked people on Facebook, hey, if you could ask God one question about your relationship with him, what would it be? So while you're not God, I figured
Thank you.
might be able to help answer some of these unknown questions. And so Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you.
Evan, I have enjoyed this. I love your heart. I love what you're doing in the podcast. I love that you're doing it for yourself. You know, that you're on the journey. You're looking for the answers. I love that about what you're doing. There's no pretense about you, and I just bless you on what you're doing. Thank you for serving God's people. I really do.
That means a lot. I really do appreciate that. So, well, we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Feel free to. I'd love to keep in touch with you, Evan. Seriously.
Likewise. Take care.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you would, I'd greatly appreciate you subscribing as well as rating and even leaving us an objective review. It helps us with our ratings and spreading the message of the Whole Person podcast. And now, may the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Thank you guys so much for listening today. Take care and God bless.